If we could please call the meeting to order. Take a roll call, please.
Chairman Murphy.
Here.
Council Laurie.
Here.
Council Nod. Two present.
Thank you. I've spoken with Councilor Noon, and he won't be able to make it tonight, but we do have the pair of us here to just enough to talk about the tree ordinance. Just to give people a bit of context here, we're talking about the tree ordinance, which for a number of years really hasn't been implemented by the city. Aspects of it have been, but not completely. Understandably, some of the aspects, because of funding issues, because of planning issues, haven't been able to be implemented. But we're here tonight to discuss how we can. We do have a draft of a potential ordinance change. But basically, we're here tonight to discuss how the city might better be able to implement the tree ordinance that's in keeping with the intent of the original ordinance, but also is something that's feasible for the city to do. So I don't know if Mr. Marchand, you'd like to give any kind of introductory remarks, but thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Murphy. As you said, this goes back to, I think, a motion you had made in September of last year, a response of which was made in November of last year, that the city we would look at how we might implement this, how we might look at the various aspects, and streamline it in a way that, as you say, addresses the intent of the original ordinance, but realizes the realities of resources and tries to be creative in that implementation. And so what we have is the draft for that. The work that went into the draft was with the Division of Planning and Development, the Law Department, Public Works Department, who implements a lot of the actions of the tree ordinance in terms of tree replacement and removal. And so we've developed that and presented it to the council, and we're ready to discuss any aspects of it and to see, kind of explain any of that and how that came about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are a few changes to note. Some of the major changes were the original ordinance called for tree replacement on a inch-by-inch basis per caliper, which, because of funding issues, was not something that's feasible. But this ordinance now calls for tree replacement on a one-by-one basis, unless it's the caliper of the tree is greater than 24 inches, and in that case, it would be replaced on a 2-to-1 basis. One of the main issues that I had with the amended ordinance was that there's no real opportunity for the public to weigh in on the planning process of it. So that if you have a tree that's removed, there should also be, at that public hearing, a process for the public to weigh in on how those trees or tree is to be replaced. I think in that situation, it puts some onus on the request to remove the tree, the people requesting to remove the tree, to come up with a plan on how they replace it. And in that way, you get closer to implementing the ordinance than you have for several years now. Beyond that, there are situations that come up, emergency situations, where no notification really is required, no hearing is required because of the nature of the tree. But in those situations, you can come back and actually have some kind of planning process. You can have a plan that's submitted that people can weigh in on, particularly those most affected by it, but that people can weigh in on, so that there's an actual replacement of those trees, and again, it's more in keeping with the intent behind the ordinance. We do have some people here, I think, that have been affected by the lack of enforcement or the lack of implementation of this ordinance, and so I'd ask if those here are wanting to speak, that they be given the opportunity to do that. Sure.
My name is David Fieldsend. I live at 76 New Hall Street. Last year, the city removed all of the trees on New Hall Street and did repave it and improve the sidewalks, which were in dire need of repair. However, the process in terms of the tree removal and planning for replacement was just seemed flawed throughout the whole stretch, in that, you know, the removal and the repaving seemed like the priority, and then it was an afterthought kind of as to where the trees were going to go. Various people from the city had said that they were going to be replacing the trees, or at least some of the trees, and there were 434 diameter inches total trees removed on New Hall Street, and there's now no trees on New Hall Street. And I just want to make sure that the process, you know, I'm not sure about the amendments, I haven't really had a chance to look at them, but I just want to make sure that the process allows for greater kind of, or a better foresight and planning ahead of time, so that, you know kind of going in where the trees are going to be replaced, at least to some extent. Because I know there were a bunch of people on the street who wanted the trees just completely removed. There were a group of other people who wanted the trees removed because they weren't the right trees for the street, on the basis that they were going to be replaced. And now they're not going to be replaced, or they haven't been replaced. So that's just kind of where that process left us. And now the net result is that there are no trees on New Hall Street. And I don't know, it's kind of made for a less attractive street, and removed all the benefits that came with street trees. But the sidewalks are nice, but it was nicer with the trees. So I just want to make sure that the new ordinance allows for some mechanism to say, okay, well, they're going to come out, but we're going to replace them at least a certain number in this area rather than in some other area at some future date. And also, my recollection of the process back then was that there was no time frame for when the city needed to replace them by. And I just want to make sure that that might be a potential fix as well, to say, like, if they're going to be removing these trees, they're going to be replaced within a year or 6 months or whatever it is. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Laurie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I could barely hear. I don't know if that microphone's on or not. It's on.
Maybe.
There's no trees down there now, right?
That's correct. Yeah, there's no trees.
Now, maybe before I came on the council, that was part of the manager's initiative down in the back Central Street area. The reason for taking the trees, and one was the sidewalk conditions. Two, the trees were wrapping around the pipes, the roots. The idea was, and if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, and I think Henry was involved, they were going to replant new trees that didn't root as deep. But I did talk to some residents on New Hall Street that didn't want the trees, and again, it was public input, but I don't know why they really didn't want them. The new trees would have been thinner, they would have been shady, and they wouldn't have wrapped around the pipes. But you know, I was surprised because I thought they were all going to be replanted myself.
Right.
And I don't know why the neighbors really didn't want them.
And neither do I, but I recall that we were told that when they were pouring the concrete for the sidewalk to potentially put in tree boxes, a bunch of the neighbors came out and said that they didn't want them. And I don't know, it just seems like that's kind of a flawed process if it's who yells the loudest during construction gets what they want. I mean, rather than have some foresight ahead of time. But sorry.
I was going to say, I knew that what I had heard was some of the neighbors were concerned about the pipes. But I also, if I remember correctly, and I think Henry Marchand will talk on this, it could have been a lack of education for the residents. Those new trees wouldn't have wrapped around the pipes. They would have been, and they wouldn't have destroyed the sidewalks. The sidewalks that are being put in now would have remained fine. They don't destroy the sidewalk or the piping.
Right, and there were also potential other creative solutions that were discussed that people didn't really seem, as a majority, that into, as like having like knockouts, or I don't know what they're called, into the street,
Chicanes, yeah.
chicanes,
Yeah.
where trees could go in there and stay far away from anyone's house or utilities or anything like that. But I don't know. I understand it's difficult to weigh the when residents themselves don't say that they don't want the trees. However, it's a citywide goal to have street trees, and at least to some extent. I mean, there's just a drastic change from what it was to what it is now. So it just felt like it could have been better conceived ahead of time for the replacement, and I don't know if there were scheduling or financial conflicts in terms of trying to get the asphalt and the sidewalks in as quick as possible, which is understandable. But at the same time, it's that there's a major quality of life difference for removing the entire street canopy.
Thank you, Mr. Fieldson. I think that having that public hearing process where planning is involved, where there's a plan presented for public comment at that point, solves some of the kind of issues that were raised by the speaker. Because you then have a land use board that is now not only taking into account public comments on both sides of the issue, which is important, that it's not just a haphazard process where any neighborhoods that happen to be aware of it are able to weigh in and kind of direct what actually happens, but that there's a public process where all kinds of people, whether they be pro or con, are able to weigh in on it, that they be involved. But also, it ensures really that the decision-making that takes place there is guided by the master plan document, which is a really important thing to have happen. Because it's one thing to have a project like the Newhall Street, I guess, repaving of Newhall Street. It's one thing to have that, try and approach the master plan objectives. It's another to completely contradict them, where there's, it crosses a brook at one point. There's no stormwater control measures that have been implemented there, and as far as rain gardens or anything to that effect, including public shade trees, which provide an important stormwater protection. So I think it's really important to have that, so that it is guided by the master plan, and that it's not just simply a few people that are able to weigh in and control the process. So, Councilor Lurie.
No, go ahead, finish. I was just when you're done.
So I think that that would be one of the elements that I would ask the administration to review and to potentially amend the ordinance when it is brought back for a public hearing and final vote. Mr. Marchand and then Councilor.
Sure. And unfortunately, Newhall Street was something that going forward, I think, taught us that in the future, unfortunately, if the planning process had gone and the hearings we did have, the majority was saying no trees. What we're looking at now is to establish a policy where it's a public way, it's a public sidewalk, the trees shall be replanted. And according to dig-safe guidelines and according to appropriate tree guidelines, but rather than put it up to a yes or no vote to say they will go in, and then figure out what type and where according to the utilities and those types of things. In some cases, it may be that the public process will preclude the trees from going in, or the majority would not want them to go in. What we're looking at is creating something that says the trees will go back. If there are trees there, they will go back. If they were planted, such as New Holland, places where they might not have, shouldn't have been because of utilities or other things, then we'll figure that out and put that along the street and make sure that that works.
Thank you. I know that there was an issue with the prior trees. I mean, it wasn't as if these were, you know, the perfect. I mean, it was a very nice street to walk down, but they were impeding the use by disabled persons to use a sidewalk. Now, I don't know who would want to use the sidewalk because it's not really a nice street to walk down. So there's that public hearing process, I would hope, would you know, resolve those competing issues and hopefully address all of them. But there are also planning measures that could be looked at so that you don't have the same kind of impact on, you know, long-term impact on the infrastructure there. So there are things like the use of recycled rubber on the sidewalks so that they expand and contract with the frost heaves and with the growing of tree roots and that sort of thing. So that you don't have those sidewalks, you know, really growing up, so that they become impassable as they had in the past. But also looking at things like what Mr. Fieldsend had mentioned, the chicanes that were actually talked about in the MIT study on the Back Central neighborhood, where you have bump outs, and this isn't something it's not the case that it's too late for these types, I think, of interventions, that you have some of the parking areas that are, you know, parking spaces now for residential use could in fact be used to plant trees. So you have bump outs, and it actually, I think, would create a slower traffic down that street as a traffic calming measure. So there are things, I think, that can be done immediately or in the near future to address what hasn't been done in compliance with the current ordinance. But I think also in looking at how we come up with an ordinance that works in the future, that's feasible, and that the city can fund. These are things to take into account. Thank you.
Thank you,
Councilor
Mr. Mayor.
Lowry.
Thank you. As far as notification, I'm wondering if, I guess we're going to have a tree warden, and it's going to be the DPW commissioner or your...
Congratulations.
Congratulations. It just gets better every day, doesn't it? And then they'll be working through the Conservation Commission. Taking down the old trees or bringing in new trees isn't going to be done overnight. I'm wondering if we shouldn't try to have a standard for letters for abutters, people with near the house, people who are going to be impacted. I wouldn't say it's going to be an ordinance like an ordinance change in a neighborhood, but maybe so many homes are notified, and how just people close to the trees, as the mayor was saying, as the gentleman saying, people who are impacted. Under the manager's initiative, I think probably a mailing goes out to a large group of people through the neighborhood groups, and at that time, the plans could be at least brought up and for public debate. I know the mayor wants to stay with the master plan, but I think something more on terms of letters. The master plan is capable of changing 8 to 10 years, 12 as the city changes. This city's going to change rapidly over the next several years, and hopefully the master plan will change with it. And so maybe I'm just thinking something a little bit more in terms of letters and things like that. But how we would determine, I would leave that up to the Conservation Board or the tree warden. From my experience, most of the trees that are taken down are sick over the years. They impede traffic. They impede the electrical wires. They actually become a nuisance in the neighborhood, as we're talking about the sidewalks, but I've always found them to be more dying, electrical, things like that. And the electric company actually has the right to come and snip the trees anyway, which they do. So as far as the letters, I'd like to hear from the Conservation Commission or the warden, maybe the DPD of some. I can't think of how many you would want to notify, but at least the abutters.
I don't see a problem with that. I mean, this was an unusual project. I don't know if I'm on or not, but this Newhall thing was very out of the ordinary. We don't usually have a place where we got to cut down a bunch of trees for a project like that. So when we do something like that, I personally don't see an issue. Just like, you know, when we pave a street, we give notice to all the abutters. I
Right,
don't think
absolutely.
that's a problem. So.
I think that'd be fine.
If it's an emergency, like it's dying, dead, it's gonna fall, I mean, there are times when you just have to do it. You don't necessarily have time to give somebody a letter that says, we gotta do this.
Right, and that's,
Right.
that's covered by the ordinance.
Yeah,
If it's
but
an emergency.
on a project like Newhall Street, yeah, I don't see why that would be a problem.
Yeah, I think it's just, as the mayor was talking about, for public input, to try to reach out anyway as much as we can.
Maybe offer that as a motion in terms of
Sure.
incorporating that into the...
I'd like to make that as a motion, that we would at least send letters to the residents nearby, the abutters, to notify them of the changes.
And to include the replacement plan as part of it.
And with the replacement plan attached to the letter, whether it's going to be one tree or two trees, and how we're going to replace the tree.
Motion by Council Lowry, seconded by myself. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, so voted. We do have Jane Calvin here.
Sure.
From the Lowell Parks and Conservation Trust.
Thank you. I am Jane Calvin, Executive Director of the Lowell Parks and Conservation Trust. I have a few quick comments. I wanted to give you a brief history on the ordinance. 9/11 for me is a big memory for the obvious reasons, but I was standing on Gen S Street at the time talking about the removals of trees there. That incident there sparked this ordinance, which I helped write with Danny Tenzar, counselor at the time. We based it on my work at the time. I'd worked for 10 years with the Department of Conservation and Recreation at the state as an urban forester. I am a trained forester and have worked in community forestry, Baltimore, all over the state of Massachusetts and such, and based it on the most progressive ordinances in the state at the time. So I think we have to applaud ourselves in the first place that this is a pretty progressive ordinance. And I am happy with the changes that have been made because I think they're much more pragmatic. I'm going to back up a minute and to the comments that were made earlier in terms of the sidewalks and flexibility and stuff like that. The rubber asphalt is a great idea. I think we need to go even deeper and think about what happens underneath there and the soil that we provide. The roots come up because they don't have an adequate environment underneath. So if we could think about, and the ideas have rumbled around downtown in terms of structural soils underneath the sidewalks. And in a really tight environment like that, that would be a great thing to just do, and I know it's hard to do. But there might be some pilot places in the city that we want to try and do that, because I haven't heard that it's been done in the city yet, and structural soil is out there and works. I think the issue with pipes is a bit of a myth, pardon me, but it's the pipes are the issue, not the tree. And I think we need to make sure that the tree is not always the issue, that the pipes have a weakness in them, the soils are not adequate for them. I think we need to kind of change how we think about the infrastructure that we provide for trees. When we're thinking about replacements, I want to be really careful that the city is not, when we're talking about these replacement plans, that they're not just any tree. If we consistently put in the easiest to care for tree, we're going to get nothing but ornamentals in the city, and no oaks, and we're going to get the easy to care for trees, and we're not going to be diversifying the city's canopy. And that right now, Not only do we have the threat of Asian longhorn beetle, and we don't want to see that here, we also have emerald ash borer. And we don't want to see what happened in Worcester happen in Lowell because we have a monoculture of trees. So I would urge that whatever happens at the planning or conscom level, that we think about the diversity of trees, and we not, when we're thinking about replacing trees, we need to think about more shade trees, ornamental where appropriate, site appropriate, but not necessarily, what's easiest and the nicest tree to have around. Setback plantings I encourage as well. I'm happy to work with Mr. Fieldshand on going door to door on Newhall Street. We have funding through the CDBG program, and we're more than we've done it in Back Central before. We're happy to do it again and see who wants trees, and I will train them how to do the trees. We just went through this with the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership and Habitat for Humanity and trained first-time home buyers on how to plant trees. So we're familiar with that process. I think the changes to the ordinance are really reasonable. I think moving it into the conscom is really smart because you actually take away that conflict that the tree warden automatically has as head of DPW, and you kind of you segregate those responsibilities a little bit. So I think that's actually quite a progressive move to make. Yes.
I'd just like to add, I wouldn't mind seeing a program like that citywide. I spent 30 years delivering mail, and I have skin cancer due to the sun. And I'm knocking doors again, as many people are, and how much shade Lowell actually lasts. I was over in Pawtuckaville yesterday, which is, I don't think I saw really any trees. I parked my car under one tree, and for about 2 hours I was in 90-degree weather, and there was nothing. And I think I'm at the skin doctor 3 times a year. And so trees really do play an important, not just for looks, but for the air. They clean the air. And there's several factors, but I think just for general comfort of the population, cooling down the homes in the area during the day, I think it'd be a great program to see if we could do that citywide somehow anyway. And so it'd be interesting to hear your remarks on the Central Street area and how we would maybe move it along to others. Back Central, there's no trees. Outside of Newhall Street, as a
Yeah.
kid, we used to see a squirrel and figure how it got lost. It was just,
But I
we didn't
could-
have trees in the neighborhood.
I could walk you through that neighborhood now and show you all the trees that we've planted over time
Oh, I-
within that neighborhood. And believe me, we went door to door begging people to plant trees. And some of the places where you see the most obvious spots for trees, no go.
Right.
So there's that can be done, and I think there's probably a new generation of landowners that we could speak with. But I think it'd be fun to try and get some more trees down on Newhall, even if it's 2 or 3. It's worth it.
And I think the mayor makes a point. There are some streets in the city that really don't have a lot of traffic and are quite wide in some of the older neighborhoods. And the idea where you could actually have an area in the street that comes out, and maybe that's where you want to put your oaks or maples and things like that, a real good shade tree. And I think it really helps the neighborhood look better too. But I think that's really an idea, not a bad idea from the mayor. In certain areas, when you look at the neighborhood, can the street, we did do it downtown, I believe in the 70s, and it looks much better. So, but I'm looking forward to your report. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 very quick things before we adjourn this meeting. One is to note that another key change to the ordinance would be on the annual urban forestry plan. We've talked about the replacement of trees that are taken down, which over the last few years has really just been kind of treading water. But in terms of coming up with a long-term plan for increasing the tree canopy, I think would be an important part of any report out of the administration. I brought up previous motions to look at using our capital plan as a way to do that. We've had in the past expenditures on vehicles which don't necessarily meet the definition of capital plan expenditures because they don't last necessarily beyond a certain amount of time. But But I think that you could make the argument that, you know, putting out capital expenditures for an entire canopy rather than just the individual tree makes sense, because these are things, of course, that will last 100 years or more. So appreciate some kind of plan that's presented back to the council on that issue. There is another section that's stricken from the current ordinance in the proposed ordinance on the review of subdivision developments, and I wonder if Mr. Marchand could speak to that. It's under 26 B subsection 6. The review of subdivision, the tree warden shall, in cooperation with the planning board, review all proposed subdivision plans, commercial developments. I understand there might be some kind of redundancy in the second part of it, where the tree warden would review applications and proposals submitted to the Conservation Commission, where the Conservation Commission, in effect, will become the tree board. But in the first part of it, I think it's not necessarily duplicative.
We can look at that. My understanding, if I recall correctly, is that the projects need to go through the planning board.
Right.
And they're looked at in that manner, and there was, between that and the Conservation Commission, as tree board, would be coverage for that. But we can revisit that and take a look and see if that's an issue.
It seems as though there might be, in this situation, no input from the conservation acting as a tree board to the planning board in cases where you know, the Conservation Commission wouldn't be involved anyway. So that might be something to still include in the ordinance, rather than just completely strike it from the current.
Okay.
So I would entertain then a motion to refer those portions of it back to the city manager and the law department to draft up to be presented to the city council.
Second.
Motion by myself, seconded by Councilor Laurie. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, so voted. And then, being 5 after 6:30, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, second.
Seconded by myself. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, so voted. Thank you very much for being here.